Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Welcome, I'm Lauder, your host from Single Focus Talent, and I'm joined by our non-exec director, John Quigley, today.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Today we are joined by Ted Hawksford. Ted has an extensive background in HR with well-known household names like Microsoft, Booking.com, and now more recently in Liquid Planner, are really setting the tone for intelligent collaboration and working together in this new normal that we're all going through, particularly pertinent where folks are remote, right? So very keen to speak with Ted today and understand what it is that they're doing in this space. So welcome to today's show, Ted.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Our pleasure to host you. So if you would, just to kick things off, could you maybe take us through your career thus far to date and some of those inflection points and decision trees that you went through to go down particular avenues that you did, if you would?
You bet. I'd be happy to. I started my career after graduating from a college called Washington State University with a degree called hospitality management. And it was a degree that was a fantastic place to kick off a career because companies came recruiting us. One of them was Disney, and that's the company I chose. But working my way through college, I worked for Nordstrom. And I share that early detail because it's relevant to what has formed the foundation of my career. And I think will give your listeners some perspective as to who I am today as a professional. So Nordstrom is well known as a retailer of high-end quality goods, but better known for their commitment to customer and their quality of service. Disney, likewise, as a theme park operator and a movie producer and cruise ships and resorts, is known for their commitment to service and the experience they offer guests. In fact, so committed to it, they've created a language around it. You're not an employee, you're a cast member. You're not a customer, you're a guest. And you don't wear a uniform, you wear a costume. And that was fantastic. And that's how I learned and where I learned to be a manager working at Disneyland in Southern California. From there, after spending some time with that company, I joined a firm called Aramark. It's a global service management firm that really takes on the identity of the companies that it hires: convention centers, stadiums, arenas, schools, hospitals, etc. And the identity of the company is in the background. And that was a little bit of a formative experience as well, that it's not about you as the leader, it's about the service you're providing. And that leads to renewal of contract, and that leads to growth of the business. These things I learned as a professional in the service and hospitality industry. And after a few years with Aramark, I was tapped on the shoulder and said, Ted, we have this interesting opportunity. Well, three actually. One could be moving from your home city of Seattle, Washington to Phoenix, Arizona. Another could be to Reno, Nevada. A third could be this HR job that would keep you in Seattle, where we think you want to be. But we're happy to invest in you to either advance your career as a general manager or move to human resources. And I pondered it, spoke to my wife, and we decided to stay in Seattle. But that wasn't the driving decision point, because the other two jobs would be rewarded more lucratively. It was that HR really appealed to me. I recognized that everything we did, especially in that industry, but truly across all industries, was through people, through others. And if I could influence that in a company across not just the team that reported to me, but influence every employee in the company, that it would be really rewarding to me personally and professionally. And therefore, that was my introduction to human resources. I spent several more years in that company. They sponsored my graduate degree from the other Washington State school. and went on to move to California again and lead HR for the Uniform Services division of that company. Had an opportunity then to craft policy and strategy from a people perspective that helped that business grow to over $1 billion and from about 12,000 employees to 16,000 employees, ultimately acquiring other businesses and having some strong success. I had friends back in Seattle, Redmond really, who had been working for Microsoft. They called and said, Ted, the company's growing. We think you should join. And I did, 2004, and spent 9 years with Microsoft. The first 3 in the Xbox division. I was not a gamer, but my kids thought it was cool. And so that's the group I joined. I went on to work with MSN and later Bing, and ended my career with Microsoft in the Windows division. Having 3 very different experiences at that company, all in human resources roles, but in a very large firm like Microsoft, they were more specialized. I focused in one on leadership development and organizational design, in another role on generalist activity, really human performance and company culture, and a third on recruiting. And throughout my career, as a manager of people and later as a human resources generalist, I thought I was a great recruiter until I did it full time. And I realized, wow, there are all kinds of layers here. And over 3 years in that capacity, supporting a part of the business with 8,000 employees and hiring about 1,000 people a year, I worked on university recruiting campaigns, on internal recruitment, and in other words, caring as well for movement and selection of our own people inside the 42,000 at the time person Microsoft, caring as well for our own people during that career transition and selection process, as we did with external candidates who were catered to quite aggressively and supported generously. And I think we really made some improvements. In fact, as I talked to friends who are still with the firm, many of the things I was able to work on then are still in play today. This is when I made a transition to Booking.com and spent 4 years in a very international role, really pursuing that because of the opportunity to work for a company that wasn't headquartered in the United States. But headquartered, as many listeners of yours know, is headquartered in Amsterdam. Booking is a little bit back to the hospitality roots that I grew up in with Disney and with Aramark, just focused on travel, but certainly partnering closely with all the accommodation providers that served as the inventory Booking.com was selling. And my responsibility there was for North and South America. So spent a lot of time in South America, a place that I had not spent as yet in my career. And after 4 years, was lured into leading HR again for a small restaurant company in Seattle called Restaurants Unlimited. It had been around for 50 years, had 42 restaurants across 10 states and 1 restaurant in Canada. That was a nice opportunity because it gave me a chance again to craft strategy from the very beginning and lead the people agenda for an industry where the people agenda is very important. Of course, the service industry and hospitality again. Getting now to where I am today, a neighbor who had founded a company 12 years prior called Liquid Planner saw the success I had affecting culture, leading people, managing change, establishing programs that helped companies succeed, and supporting people really finding their passion, finding their strength, and bringing that every day to their jobs. And this neighbor, this friend, had a CEO vacancy in his company and said, Ted, I think you should take the job. Initially, I said, no, I'm a human resources professional. I love my job. I love what I do. And he saw something that I didn't. He said, Ted, there's no more important facet of a CEO's job than their orientation to people. And I'll leave it there, but I've now been in my current job for almost 2 years as CEO of a small 37-person company making project management software here in Seattle.
So I absolutely love that. So I think without exception, the best leaders we have spoken with always reference their first job. And it's usually something that's very, very service and customer orientated. So, for example, they may have waited tables. They may have been front of house in maitre d' function. They may have worked in hospitality and in other functions as well. And it really comes down to this idea of listening. I loved what you said about Disney's approach to service and being a cast member and a guest. I think that's very, very interesting by way of their mindset shift right off the bat. I suppose maybe if you could, tell us a bit about some of your people engagements as a leader where you, worked with folks who were kind of rock stars and were really good, and how you brought them to kind of headier heights, as it were. Or maybe as well, if you could share with us some stories around a real shift and a turnaround, maybe at an individual level or a divisional level, where you saw somebody who had that potential, but you just needed to kind of pick the lock of what was important to them and how that allowed them to unlock their career potential, as it were. Maybe if you could share some stories around that, if you could.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. What comes to mind immediately is Microsoft when you reference rockstars. Microsoft has the benefit of such a strong global brand, sometimes picked on. Certainly when I worked for the company, now it seems to be other large tech companies, but attracted tremendous talent. And I was surrounded by very bright people who had joined the company, but sometimes had a hard time applying that capability to the jobs. And so I referenced briefly in my introduction, building university recruiting programs. I was working at the time supporting the hardware businesses at Microsoft, keyboards, mice. This is before Surface was created, but it was being developed at the time. And this particular individual had a need to support talent transfer between the hardware divisions of the company. And a need to generate a culture that supported that. So Xbox had been around for a decade and had developed a bit of an ego that they were the strongest component of the hardware business at Microsoft. And once you joined Xbox, you'd never joined keyboards and mice. I mean, who wanted to build that after building game consoles and devices that supported that business? And Surface wasn't really a product yet. And to join the fray in that industry, convincing talent to come do that was hard at a firm like Microsoft. And so there was this reticence to move great talent around and to have experiences at these different hardware businesses. So we needed to overcome that. We decided to do two things. One was build from scratch. So establish a university recruiting program that started with a rotational development program through each of the three main departments or divisions of the hardware business. And number two was to have each of these groups celebrate what made them special. Have some of the leaders profiled. And so their profiles were marketed, if you will. Their brands were built. And it wasn't that you were going to work for keyboards and mice necessarily. You were going to work for this particular individual who had established amazing success in their career and was represented as a leader who was building other leaders. And so this individual I'm referring to who had this opportunity just didn't know how to execute it. I helped sort of break down the components of what was needed into actionable tasks that I just described, and we put them into play. So it was a little bit of program management applied to these ideas that he actually brought to me, and then together we were able to roll them out. So sometimes it's just formulating ideas, breaking them down into smaller components and actionable tasks. I suppose when I look back, that was the early stage of me realizing I had decent project management skills that sort of are a good fit with my current employer, Liquid Planner.
And obviously people skills too. So my question is, has it been difficult, Ted, for you to acclimatize yourself to the CEO role then, considering you've worked with such large organizations of a kind of fledgling SaaS company? Let me frame that for you first. So you've spent a lot of your career kind of climbing the corporate ladder at other organizations. One day, you're CEO of a SaaS company, and you don't have a boss anymore per se. So it's not your traditional kind of manager, leader, employee relationship. And so first thing about that is you're working for a committee, not a person. And secondly, if you ever went to that committee going, you know, gosh, I wonder what we should do next quarter, they would probably look at you and say, I think you should help us to find a new CEO, right? If you ask that question, because you're supposed to know, what's going to happen next quarter. Your job is to run the company. So it's not a manager-employee relationship. Has managing that been difficult for you?
It was a big transition. I think you're right. I work for the board effectively, and through them for all the investors that have helped Liquid Planner get to where it is today. I think you mentioned earlier listening. I needed to listen to the board, and I recall distinctly my interview with the board, and then even more distinctly my first board meeting. Having never been in a board meeting before, I was nervous. I was scared. These are very accomplished individuals, most of them investors in a number of SaaS companies, and very successful. And I didn't know what to expect. As you suggest, they chose me and gave me the opportunity, and were giving me trust to take this company to where it needed to go. And the most important skill, I think, is listening. First, I suppose, just stepping back to understand, I've been saddled with the responsibility to do well by them, but more importantly, well by the company. I was given the job because others recognized that I could extract greater performance from a team, not because I had a proven track record of being a CEO. And so that would be the second. Listen to what your bosses, whoever they are, whether it's a committee or an individual, what they're really looking for you to do, and then recognize what got you the job in the first place, and focus on delivering against those strengths. And so for me, it was engaging the team that made up Liquid Planner, and helping them find the path to the most important work to do every day. And little by little, when that focus was intensified and aligned across the company, we became more efficient. The second board meeting was far easier than the first. I was able to then tell some stories about the successes we began to see, and the path that was now clearer after 3 months of working in the firm. So it was a transition. I didn't have somebody defining the work for me. I needed to listen carefully to what that board was asking me to do, and then deliver on what I felt I could do well. Not try to be the CEO, if there is an individual definition, but to be good at what I'm good at and to apply those skills every day.
Wow, that's a very comprehensive answer. And I suppose, we've talked to many CEOs on this show, and a lot of the questions that CEOs of software companies ask themselves, CEOs of any companies really, is, do I have the right team? It's probably a question that never gets put to bed, both because it's subjective and everybody has an opinion, and also because some people are good at different phases of the company's growth. So,
Mhm.
I mean, that's a reality. Like we've all dealt with it at some stage or another. And just because someone, was the right member of the team last year doesn't mean they're a right member of the team next year. Is that a question you ask yourself a bit? Do I have the right team?
It is. In fact, you're right. I like how you put it. It never gets put to bed. Certainly, I inherited a team when I joined the company, and I think back to any team I've been on. You inherit the team you join, your peers, your direct subordinates, and your supervisors or other stakeholders that are important to your job. In the case of Liquid Planner, I inherited a leadership team, and there was a range of skills. Some had been promoted out of small jobs and now were leading a team for the company or in a big individual contributor capacity. And others had been with the company for a decade and performed most of the roles in the company during the course of that time, as is very possible in a small company like ours. And everybody has an agenda, whether it's overt or subtle. There's an agenda. Some come to work because they're working for their paycheck and looking for the rewards that were promised or they believe are available. Others join a startup because they are looking forward to that transaction, that exit that will result in riches when options convert to real money, if that's possible. And others just enjoy the nature of a small team. They join Liquid Planner to be part of a family, to be part of a small group, and to find their fit relative to where they could contribute. A small tech company in Seattle is battling against the biggest firms in the world for talent. And so you need to find those people that have joined for the right reasons. We're not going to be able to compete head to head like the big companies do on salaries and on benefits and on stock, but we can compete on culture. We can compete on development of professional capabilities through hands-on work that's available in a small company and not sometimes in a big company, relative to the range of tasks one gets exposed to. And so this is a long way of answering your question. The leadership team I was looking for are people that have joined Liquid Planner for the right reasons. Sure, everyone wants the exit, but that's years away. We want people who are curious and of course capable, but capable in a very broad sense. And we want people who are conscientious, who are thinking about the success of our company through the eyes of our customer experience, but also with an eye on operating the company responsibly. Given where we are as a firm and how we want to grow, it's different than some of our direct competitors who are very, very well financed and have lots of money to throw after growth. So curious, conscientious, and capable are three things we hire for and three attributes I look for in the leaders that I work with. I think they'll help us wrestle through the tough decisions that emerge almost every day and make good decisions on behalf of the other team members at Liquid Planner and really importantly on behalf of our customers. And when I see gaps in those three attributes, that's where I begin to wonder, is this person really a fit? They might be doing great work. They might be advancing the ball, so to speak, but sometimes at a cost. And there's nowhere to hide in a 37-person company. And part of my job is to protect the other members of the team. And occasionally the toughest part of my job is asking someone to leave who otherwise is doing a good job, but no longer fits.
Excellent. And you know what? I read one of your some comments that you made on a post where you describe, I think it was one of your team had elevated their educational status by taking some high-level project management courses, which obviously aligns well with your software, etc. And you describe one of your core values as always be learning, which probably fits into one of those C's you just mentioned in terms of curiosity. You know, you always need to have a sense of curiosity about everything, and you always need to be learning. So we should probably switch gears here a little bit and give us a little bit of insight into your company and the software. So Liquid Planner seems to be focused on helping people and teams with execution in project management more than the strategy piece, and collaboration as well. So like what sets your solution apart from everybody else? There's a lot of project management tools out there.
There are a lot of project management tools. In fact, it's a much more crowded marketplace than I'd prefer. But when you have good competitors, it keeps you sharp. You have to be strong to compete and to win deals. Our project management software stands apart as a more robust solution. It has capacity to handle big and very complex projects or portfolios of projects, whereas some other marketplaces are more task managers or narrower in focus, perhaps deliver well as a collaboration tool, which we do also, but sometimes don't manage the complexity as successfully. And so why do we stand apart? Why do the analysts rate us highly in that area? It's because of our scheduling engine. It was the algorithm our two founders had built in the beginning that bears in mind three important factors. One is prioritization of work. Another is availability of resources. And a third is ranged estimates for completion of work. And it's that third component or ingredient that's really very important. The truth is, work sometimes, you might anticipate something would be done in a day, and it takes 3 days. Other things perhaps get done in 4 hours instead of a full day. And lots of things get in the way. It could be another project. It could be simple distraction. And it could be that there was more complexity to the task than was anticipated originally. But if those range estimates aren't applied, then estimates for full project completion are sometimes wildly inaccurate, or budget, or availability of resources. The algorithm we have in place with those three ingredients, the prioritization, the resource availability, and the ranged estimates for completion, enable really accurate answers to the question when. When is my project done? When will resources be available to work on new tasks? Or when might I need to go get more resources to complete this important project that I've prioritized highly? And so we call that our scheduling engine, and we call the outcome planning intelligence. And it works really well. In fact, many of our customers tell us they couldn't do their work without us. Some these days during the COVID pandemic indicate that they'd be lost without us. They need to be more efficient than they used to be, and Liquid Planner is enabling that. So that's what sets us apart, and that's how we take our product to market.
Yeah, I think that's something I definitely want to dive into. We speak to a lot of SaaS companies at the moment that have seen a pretty dramatic shift in the way that they're operating, and some have actually benefited from the pandemic. Not something to be celebrated necessarily, but I think the pandemic has been a catalyst to a change in the way that we work. And I think we are forever changed as a result of this. And I suppose my question is how have you seen collaboration shift and I suppose productivity increase? My wife is the director of a business development organization and in Oracle, and they've seen a considerable uplift in productivity, etc. So I'm curious to see what you've seen in the marketplace, Ted, as a result of this new normal. I'm certain that you will have used your software to collaborate across geographies where you wouldn't be in an office together, but maybe what are you seeing kind of more domestically where people may be in the same city but are now at home? What does that look like in your world at Harvey?
Yeah, collaboration tools are being leaned on more heavily than ever before, and the obvious ones are video conferencing. But we're all getting tired of that. Before we started this official call, we were just chatting about about getting work done and how good that feels. Our project management software enables that feeling with every task every day. And it captures work in a really clear way that helps people stay focused on work when they've got fatigue of working independently from home. They miss the social interaction. They are, captured by video conference calls all day, every day. Liquid Planner or any project management software can be a respite from that, a real support to focus, to alignment, and to collaboration across the team on what's important, and that's getting work done. And so you mentioned Oracle and a feeling or an observation that they're more productive than they ever have been. I've heard that same story repeated across our customers and across many other industries as I talk to neighbors and colleagues in the marketplace. Certainly COVID has been difficult and distracting, but it has, it's what's the phrase, don't let a good crisis
Go to waste.
get wasted. This crisis has caused us to look at how we work together and what tools we employ to make us more efficient. Because in some cases, companies have to be more efficient to survive the length of this pandemic. In other cases, it's just the nature of work has changed and how teams come together, and they needed tools to enable that. We are relatively neutral. I wouldn't say that from a business perspective, we're benefiting from the pandemic because sales and marketing has been harder in this environment than it was prior to. And companies' budgets are tighter than it was prior to. The benefit is that companies, when they do find us, I think the decision path to choosing our tool, or I suspect some of our competitors' tool, is a little bit easier because the need is more precise, it's more present, it's more urgent than it was prior to.
Yeah, I totally get that. I suppose what I've seen as well is that the way that you catalog work has become a little bit more quantifiable now. So, there's definitely value in having that water cooler or photocopier conversation, but I think today that's actually a lot more trackable and traceable, and you're kind of seeing that uplift happen in productivity. And I totally agree with you on your sentiment around never waste a good crisis. It's really a mindset shift in terms of how you view something. And I'm a firm believer in it's not about what happens to you or your organization, it's what you do next that counts. I know plenty of people, in organizations and in my personal life where they've had massive adversity and have perished as a result, and others who've had same levels from all levels of background and have thrived as a result of it. So I'm keen to know, what are some of your values from a mindset perspective that you found have really made a difference?
Yeah, so I guess I allude to some of them when I mention what I hire for, curiosity or learning. And thank you for calling out that learning is one of our core values as a company. I believe strongly that we should always invest in advancing our capacity, advancing our thought and our intellect, not on a particular topic, but on a range of topics, because through that intelligence, you gain perspective, and through perspective, you're better able to make decisions or come up with new ideas. And so that's a value I have of always be learning. Another value is equity. And that maybe comes from empathy as well. When I take the Gallup Strength Finders quiz, empathy is always my number one. And at first I was a little embarrassed by that, but I've come to embrace it as the strength that it is for me. I care deeply about other people, and I care about their circumstances and their situation. It might be why I really enjoyed that recruiting capacity during 3 years of my tenure at Microsoft. There's nothing better than helping somebody find what they're good at and find a role where they could practice that strength.
Couldn't agree more.
Except perhaps when you find somebody who's struggling and you can help them recover and find success. Those two things are things that I really enjoy, and so it's a value that I embrace. In fact, as I think about my retirement gig, because I'll always want to work and do something, it might be executive recruiting. And I've seen other human resources leaders move into that capacity because they've built a strong network, but also because they genuinely enjoy helping others. And that's something I do in my current role. In fact, I've established a small group of CEOs that help each other in their companies. We're not competitive. I was looking for people who, like me, were first-time CEOs and nervous and scared and needed help and advice. And sometimes the board or your leadership team are not safe places to go with questions that might reveal my uncertainties or my fears. I'm actually very transparent as well, which is a value, and I trust deeply. And so I do go to those people, but initially I was nervous. And so this cohort of CEOs has been a good place to go for advice and perspective. And so maybe I'll wrap this with just relationship is another value that is meaningful to me. Personal relationships, but also professional relationships. And whether we're extroverts or introverts, all of us need people around us. It's just how we engage might be different. I show up as an introvert. My job requires me sometimes to be an extrovert. And if I surround myself with the right people, that's easier to do. And I'm better at my work.
So it sounds to me, Ted, like you have a reasonably high level of EQ and IQ obviously as well. But let's stay on the EQ piece in terms of that kind of emotional piece. Is that something like, where did that come from? Where does that come from? Is that something that you purposely and consciously and deliberately work on? Is it something that you feel other people can work on? And, because it's hard, isn't it, for us to kind of be vulnerable and kind of show that side of ourselves, because, traditionally that would have been seen as weakness, but the reality is it actually makes you stronger. You're perceived as stronger a lot of the times when you're vulnerable, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. And people look at you as a formidable person and they say, you know what, that's a formidable character that has the ability to, be relatively vulnerable. And I think it's very relevant now, because we've come from an era of, or we've come out of an era, I feel, and hopefully we have, of, prima donna leaders in organizations that are tough ass and, kind of ask too much from people, etc., but I think the EQ piece is becoming so relevant in organizations today. The ability to have self-awareness and the ability to be aware of how your actions and words affect other people in your circle or your organization or on your team. So is that something you're very aware of, that you work on, or that you advocate, or talk to us a little bit about that?
Thank you. You put it so eloquently. As I mentioned, I've been surrounded by really smart people. I would never put my IQ up against a lot of other people as higher. I rely on others who are smarter than me to get important work done or to help make tough decisions. Relative to EQ, I don't know that I've consciously worked on it. You ask where it emerged, and I suppose I became particularly aware as a child. I come from a home where my parents were divorced when I was 12, but I had 3 younger sisters, and when my father left our house, I grew up with as the man in the house as a 12-year-old.
See, that could be it. And the reason I add, it's funny, and I'm sorry for cutting across you, is that you just reminded me, is that it's something I personally have had to work on quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
my level of EQ wouldn't. I'm kind of a Route 1 guy,
Sure.
but a Route 1 guy with no malice. So it's just kind of this is it, and it's kind of let's get on with it and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But it's something that I personally have been very purposeful about working on, particularly over the past, let's say, 5 years, and something that I think is extremely important. And that's why I ask kind of where, where does that come from or whatever. So I personally had no sisters, so I think that could be it. I think you're onto something there.
It maybe, and I'm not a student of psychology, but I suspect, I do believe our behaviors and some of our foundational psychology is formed early in life. And my parents had something to do with that. I think growing up with my sisters and just having to take on a mantle of responsibility is part of that. And just because it was life, I needed to be there. And I didn't perhaps develop ego along the way for doing it. It was just something I needed to do. And so through that, I learned humility as well. Perhaps being surrounded by women early in life, I learned to express emotion more comfortably than others. And that continues to this day. And in fact, I can't help it. I'll cry at weddings and when I give speeches, just because my emotion bubbles over. And I try to lead that way too, but not emotion from a rah-rah cheerleader or tactical sergeant standpoint. It's emotion of the game. It's emotion born of shared successes. It's emotion that emerges when we overcome tough obstacles. It's emotion that especially emerges when we see people achieve successes that they didn't think they could. That is what I love to celebrate, and love to celebrate other people. So is my EQ worked on and developed with intention? I think it's just part of the fiber of my being. I like to support.
And it's authentic. It sounds very authentic, and I think that's really important, isn't it? Authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's in a word. That's probably who I am, and I can't escape from it. As much as sometimes it might feel like a burden, it's who I am.
Cool. So we always ask everybody on the show. We kind of talk about their superpowers, and for us, it really falls into 4 different buckets. It's either one of the buckets is culture, right, which is people. They're really good at attracting talent and leading talent and getting the best out of talent, and that in turn creates a wonderful culture in organizations. We've had a lot of, or a few anyway, kind of product-led organizations that have been founded by CEOs who are engineers, are very product-centric. So it's really that bucket really is about the company and the products and how they solve market and individual persona problems. They're very, very good at that. That's their superpower. Or it could be the sales piece and customers. There are a lot of companies that have ex-CROs or ex-VP of sales have stepped into the big chair, and they're extremely good at the deals management and customers. And then finally it's process. A lot of COOs make it into the big seat because they are extremely passionate about efficiency and operational excellence in organizations. Now, I'm asking which is your superpower, but I can take a really, really good guess of what you're going to say. But let's go through it anyway.
Yeah, for me, it's servant leadership or being in service of others. It's nice. This question is sort of the capstone question, as you put it, because I started this way. I started my career with Disney and Nordstrom, and those companies made me who I am today. But as I just revealed, a little bit was my late childhood and how I grew up with a degree of responsibility that maybe some children don't. And I needed to be there for others. In that case, my 3 younger sisters and mom. So it's servant leadership. I enjoy leading from the back. I think I have a capacity to have some insight into others where they're challenged, and engage to support in a subtle way that enables them to deliver on expectations. What I have to work harder on is some of those other things. Process. While I have decent project management skills, I'm getting much better working now for a company and the founder of our company who has that product mindset and design ideals, and he certainly delivers as my partner in leading this company on those components. My business acumen is strong, but that was largely built and learned from graduate school and from now nearly 30 years as a business professional. Those are tactical skills that can be applied, and numbers don't lie. People are sometimes harder to figure than numbers. And I by no means am claiming expertise, but the things we've been talking about, my empathy, my authenticity, my humility, my care for others, I think shines and gives me the capacity to be trusted as a leader, to be looked to as a leader. And I'll admit that I'm fallible along the way, and hopefully the trust I place in others then encourages them to deliver, to fill my gaps, to back me up when I fail, or to intervene when I'm on the path to making the wrong decision. That's what I invite teams to do. And I'll admit, sometimes I'm taken advantage of, but that only happens once. And by and large, if you invest in the right relationship and build the right team around you, then I think the leadership style that I have capacity for works.
See, I absolutely love this. So you don't need to sell me on that style. I'm from that school. I suppose I've been fortunate enough to be educated in some excellent corporates like Dell, Quest, and HubSpot, where they invested in leadership training. And I've similarly read the books by Dave Ramsey, etc. And I'm a big fan of Ken Blanchard as well. And it's funny, I had a friend of mine, and we ended up deciding to work together more recently in our current capacity. And he comes from an old school financial institution, right, where it's all about autocratic leadership, barking down, and it's really a dictatorial style of I'm going to give out to you, and until you get the job done. It's beatings will increase until productivity is where it needs to be.
Sure.
And he couldn't believe it when I was like, no, I'm enabling your success. I'm here to serve you. And it's mightily empowering, and it's great to see the results of that. I suppose just as we wrap up here, Ted, I'm keen just to dive into culture a little bit more. I know that you had shared with us that you've worked across different geographies. You've obviously been exposed to Europe by way of Amsterdam with Booking.com, and some capacity as well in South America. As you take that value set that you have, and you have a kind of a sort of a templated structure by which you need to get the best from people, I'm curious just on some quirky stories or some funny outcomes you had where you were learning culture on the go and through some of your organizations and roles that you had. If you could share a faux pas, if you will.
Sure. One of the first insights I had in joining Booking.com was that the European approach to rewards is different than the American approach to rewards. And I had been embroiled in the likes of Microsoft, competing for talent with other US-based companies like Google and Facebook and Netflix, and it was very combative and aggressive. And in joining Booking.com, the company appealed to passion, to preference, to individuality, and it was just part of the fabric. And so I remember in my first HR leadership team meeting, sitting in a fantastic office space in an alleyway of Amsterdam, feeling very much like a tourist, and expressing sort of an aggressive position on how we should go after acquiring talent that was needed to fund Booking.com's rocket ship growth. I was looked at with incredulity. People's eyebrows were raised and jaws were dropped when I was being so aggressive, because that's what I had learned to do for so long in my career. They said, no, we want to find the right fit for our company. We're not going to compete for talent. We're going to pursue talent in a manner that is that fits the culture of who we are as a company. And it was reflective not just of the company, but I think of some of the culture of European countries. In Italy, when I traveled there, I heard somebody say, we don't work to live. We don't live to work, we work to live. And really enjoying the moment and the environment. This isn't coming out as cleanly as I had hoped in the answer, but my perspectives changed dramatically when I joined Booking.com on what it meant to be an employer and what it meant to invite talent to join you. And it was a point in my professional career where pretty strongly held perspectives were crumbled in a moment. And it was refreshing and very appropriate. And in fact, I think the big tech companies still don't understand it, but the small tech companies do. And that's how they succeed in the marketplace.
That sounds like it's funny, right? You're saying that on one hand, that's probably not flown as well as you would have liked. But from my perspective, I was actually taking notes of a couple of things you said there that I think are profound, and some of the best stuff you've actually said on this interview so far. And I've written it down, right? Don't compete for talent, pursue talent that is perfect fit for your company. That is a fantastic perspective to have. I think it will be a great insight for anybody listening to this podcast that is a HR leader or somebody perhaps that is looking for their next role, that should be mindful of even kind of taking that perspective when they're being interviewed, to say that, kind of tell me, what does the perfect candidate look like for you? And I think that should be the starting point, because it doesn't matter what my CV says, really. It's only how relevant that is to your culture and the fit here. And also, I took a note that says, invite talent to join you. And I think that's a wonderful approach that is probably missed by a lot of organizations that are kind of in a knee-jerk fashion trying to fill open headcount and reduce their time to hire, and they're under a lot of pressure to get people on the seats on the bus without being mindful of that fit. So it's funny how things turned out. For me personally, I thought that was some quality stuff, Ted, some quality insights. So thank you very much.
Thank you
sharing that.
for summarizing it that way. When you do, it is meaningful, and that's what the story was intended to convey. The perspective on talent was refreshingly simple and effective. And I don't know, because I've only worked for Booking.com as a European employer, I don't know how pervasive that is across the European culture, but it was really effective there. And it wasn't just external talent joining the company, it was internal talent moving into new jobs. There was a lot of trust conveyed that smart people that fit the culture would figure out how to do whatever job they were given. And that was another, I think, real advantage of perspective on employment that I think is healthier in Europe at times than it is, in my experience, in many US-based companies.
Yeah, I suppose in Ireland we call it having the crack, spelled CRAIC, not the narcotic, which is really where we have this innate ability to lower our humor to the lowest common denominator, that being in intense levels of sarcasm. But I also think the crack, really, we've often asked Irish guests on this show what that means to them, and it's like an ability to work very hard, but really not an ever take ourselves too seriously in the process, and be that kind of, it's our way of being humble, or sort of taking folks down a few notches, as it were, but also just make it's really collaborative, and that's the ultimate goal at the end of it, if that makes any sense at all.
It does. I like the word.
Yeah, we're big into self-deprecating humor as well.
somewhere.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, that's we're well known for self-deprecating humor, so not taking ourselves too seriously, and being able to laugh at our own expense, and all, which kind of borderlines the kind of humility stakes that you mentioned earlier on. Like you really need to not take yourself so seriously, and all of those elements. But like Ross succinctly described it there, that's what we call the crack, or we say about someone, he's great crack, meaning that he's good for a laugh or a joke or whatever. He doesn't take himself too seriously.
I like it. I sometimes fall victim to taking myself too seriously. Humility probably is a good insulator, but humor is oftentimes even better. And it's nice to be surrounded by people who have good sense of humor.
No shortage of that here. Well, look, Ted, I can't thank you enough for your discussing some key points today. A lot of nuggets for our listeners that they'll get a ton of value from, and sharing your personal and professional and company-wide message. So really appreciate the time, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future, we hope.
Absolutely. Ross, John, thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed responding to your questions and participating in this podcast, and I look forward to continuing the relationship as well.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Ted. Our pleasure.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.